jealousy, favoritism, and an unshakable bond. Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret were complete opposites, but did their personalities bring balance or strife to their relationship? Elizabeth was born on April 21, 1926, and Margaret on August 21, 1930. At the time, their father held the title of Prince Albert, Duke of York. As the youngest son of King George V, Albert was never meant to inherit the throne, and when George V died in 1936, the crown passed to his heir, King Edward VIII, called David within the family. But Edward ruled for less than a year, abdicating in order to marry Wallis Simpson, whose status as an American divorcee made her an unsuitable match for a British king. During those early years, the two princesses lived very similar existences. Royal biographer Andrew Morton told Vogue, "They were treated just alike, same socks, same skirts, and in that way, Elizabeth was brought down to Margaret's level because there's a 4-year age difference. They were twins." Queen Elizabeth was 10 years old and Princess Margaret was 6 when their father became King George VI, and Elizabeth his presumptive heir. Elizabeth had just come home from a swimming lesson when news of her father's ascension to the throne broke. According to the Channel 5 documentary, Elizabeth, Our Queen, Margaret explained what had happened, saying, "Well, does that mean you're going to be queen now? Poor you." From that moment on, the sisters' lives were different. Not only were they suddenly in the spotlight, but Elizabeth's future became set in stone. Royal biographer Andrew Morton told Vogue that prior to their father becoming king, they lived in the shadows of Uncle David, the Prince of Wales, a charismatic figure. When he abdicated in December 1936, it was an incredible blow and transformed the lives of Elizabeth and Margaret as importantly as their parents. According to Morton, their new proximity to the throne drastically altered how the two girls were raised. He said, "The dynamic changed. Elizabeth was treated as the heir presumptive. Instead of being treated like twins, they were treated separately and educated separately, and their lives began to diverge." Elizabeth took her role as big sister very seriously. In 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret by royal biographer Craig Brown, he quotes the girl's governess, Marianne Crawford, as saying, "Lilibet was very motherly with her younger sister. I used to think at one time she gave in to her rather more than was good for Margaret. Sometimes she would say to me, in her funny, responsible manner, 'I really don't know what we are going to do with Margaret Crawford.'" Elizabeth's determination to protect her younger sister may have complicated their relationship. Body language expert Judy James said, "Elizabeth was brought up taking a slightly maternal role with her younger sister, and this even led to friction when she had to set rules and regulations for Margaret according to royal protocol." The young Princess Margaret may not have envied the responsibility that came with being heir to the throne of England, but she was jealous of the fact that Elizabeth's status as future queen meant that she was given a better education. The two were tutored at home rather than sent to school, and both received a well-rounded education, but Elizabeth's was more rigorous.
Margaret didn't have much of an education, and she had less and less of one as time went on because all the resources were concentrated on Elizabeth.
Margaret's friend and lady-in-waiting, Anne Glenconner, told People, "She always minded about not being educated as well as the Queen. The Queen had people from Eton and Cambridge, naturally, but Princess Margaret was never part of that. Margaret had a governess and was taught to play the piano and speak French. She was very well read and would have really enjoyed being educated in a more stringent fashion." In an interview with Fox News, Glenconner said that this was the only thing Princess Margaret truly envied, saying, "She was very intelligent and she valued education, so I think that's the only thing she used to talk about, but otherwise, there was no jealousy at all." Margaret was reportedly spoiled by her parents, who wanted to make sure she didn't feel left out as the future Queen, Elizabeth, received more attention. Writing for The Telegraph, royal biographer Sarah Bradford claimed she was told that King George spoiled Margaret, saying, "She was his pet. She was always allowed to stay up to dinner at the age of 13 and to grow up too quickly."
In my view, the great love of Princess Margaret's life was her father.
The way the younger princess was indulged wasn't appreciated by palace staff, said Bradford, who wrote, The courtiers didn't like her much. They found her amusing, but she used to keep her parents and everyone waiting for dinner because she wanted to listen to the end of a programme on the wireless. According to royal writer Jane Dismore, when interviewed on the podcast The Firm, Blood, Lies and Royal Succession, young Margaret was also something of a jokester, unlike her sister. Dismore said, Elizabeth didn't really like jokes played on people. She didn't want to hurt people's feelings. Princess Margaret had none of that compunction. Margaret's sense of humour is another thing that caused her father to spoil her, much to the dismay of the courtiers. Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret had very different personalities. As royal expert Victoria Arbiter explained in the Channel 5 documentary Princess Margaret, Rebel Without a Crown, Elizabeth was reserved, while Princess Margaret was outgoing. Arbiter said, Elizabeth was quite happy for Margaret to be the centre of attention, because she said, if Margaret's there, she makes everybody laugh. And so it took the pressure off Elizabeth, who perhaps was more introverted compared to her mischievous sister.
During the 50s, the press wanted photographs of only two women. One was Elizabeth Taylor and the other was Princess Margaret.
Royal biographer Craig Brown wrote in 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret that Elizabeth was the dutiful heir, while her younger sister brought a more rebellious spirit to the royal family. In describing the sisters' personalities, he wrote, Elizabeth was organised, Margaret artistic, Elizabeth discreet, Margaret attention-seeking, Elizabeth dutiful, Margaret disobedient, Elizabeth disciplined, Margaret wild. Royal biographer Andrew Morton spoke to Vogue about the sisters' personalities, saying they were the yin and the yang, and, in a way, every royal has a shadow self. Margaret was the shadow of Elizabeth. Morton made it clear, though, that while Margaret was more comfortable with the focus being on her, Elizabeth also shared many of the more gregarious traits that Margaret was known for, saying, we're used to talking about Elizabeth as being stoical, the sensible one, and Margaret, the creative one, the theatrical one. But Elizabeth did have those qualities in her. Few can say they had unfettered access to Queen Elizabeth. Royal expert Duncan Larkham told OK that Catherine, Princess of Wales, had a direct line to the Queen, and royal commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti said Elizabeth also spent a lot of time on the phone with her daughter, Anne, Princess Royal, and that the passionate horsewoman never ignored a call from her racing manager, John Warren. Princess Margaret was also able to speak to Queen Elizabeth anytime. Margaret's friend, Reynaldo Herrera, revealed in Vanity Fair that the two women were in constant communication, saying Princess Margaret had a telephone on her desk in Kensington Palace with a direct line to the Queen in Buckingham Palace, on which the two would gossip and laugh with each other daily. One of the biggest challenges to Queen Elizabeth's relationship with Princess Margaret was Margaret's affair with Peter Townsend. The ill-fated romance between the princess and the royal equerry was doomed from the start due to Townsend's previous marriage, which ended in divorce. Under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, Margaret needed Elizabeth's permission to marry, but the monarch was reluctant to give it. She didn't want to give the impression that she, and by extension, the monarchy and the Church of England, condoned divorce, which was still stigmatised in the 1950s.
Prime Minister Winston Churchill told the Queen that the Dominion Prime Ministers would never accept such a marriage.
While Elizabeth decided to give her tacit blessing to the marriage by planning to change the law, as long as Margaret gave up any claim to the throne, Margaret ended the relationship in what was seen as an act of dutiful self-sacrifice. In a statement, the princess said, "Mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble, and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before any others." Despite the sisters' tight bond, there may have been some jealousy on Margaret's part, although not enough to make her bitter toward her older sister. Royal biographer Andrew Morton told Vogue, Margaret was Elizabeth's backup in the nicest possible way, but there's an awful lot of jealousy, because Margaret was the one who commanded attention and she loved the spotlight. It's a complex relationship. It's one of loyalty and support, but also primal jealousy. Morton said Margaret was prone to tantrums, allegedly once telling her sister, "If you weren't queen, nobody would talk to you." She also refused to celebrate Queen Elizabeth's 10th wedding anniversary with Prince Philip, an incident portrayed on Netflix's The Crown. Royal biographer Sarah Bradford referred to Margaret's subconscious jealousy in her 2002 obituary of Princess Margaret for The Telegraph, writing, "Elizabeth had everything her sister wanted: a handsome husband, children, and finally, the crown." The royal family has long been known to keep a stiff upper lip, and Queen Elizabeth rarely lost her composure in public. While she was moved to tears a few times, such occasions were quite rare. Royal biographer Andrew Morton told Vogue, "You can count the number of times the Queen has cried in public on the fingers of half of one hand." And in the Channel 5 documentary Elizabeth, Our Queen, Princess Margaret's friend, Princess Josephine Lowenstein, said Margaret told her, "I've only seen my sister cry once." But Queen Elizabeth was moved to tears during the funeral of her little sister. Princess Margaret died on February 9, 2002, 2 decades before Elizabeth's own passing, and the Queen was devastated by the loss. While the announcement of Margaret's death by the Queen's press secretary was quite formal, it expressed Elizabeth's grief, reading, "The Queen, with great sadness, has asked for the following announcement to be made immediately. Her beloved sister, Princess Margaret, died peacefully in her sleep this morning." Royal biographer Sally Bedell-Smith wrote in Elizabeth, the Queen, The Life of a Modern Monarch that Elizabeth was far from stoic at Margaret's funeral. She could be seen crying as Margaret's coffin was moved to a hearse. Smith quoted Margaret's friend, Ronaldo Herrera, as saying, "It was the saddest I have ever seen the Queen."